Mitzvah 262, negative commandment 262 says the Rambam, the prohibition against one who acquires a Hebrew maidservant, that if he marries her, he is not allowed to diminish from she'ira, kesusa, ve'nasa, from her food, her clothing, and her happiness. On a simple level, Pshat, what does it mean, her she'ira, her food? There are two basic interpretations. Number one, this means to give her food, literally how much she needs. And also, she'ira can mean basar, which means the flesh. To connect both of these meanings together, and that is when a person eats food, the food becomes part of their dam, their blood, and from the blood it becomes their flesh. Number two is to give clothing. How much clothing is one required to give, says the Rambam? This is according to one's wealth. If a man is very wealthy, he has to give the woman clothing based on his wealth. When it comes to children, however, it says you don't have to give children garments based on your wealth, but based on what they need. So need is essential. Wealth is a luxury. For your wife, you have to give her more than her essential, but rather to give her luxurious clothing. When it comes to children, it's enough to give according to their needs. Einasa means happiness, intimacy. The word einasa in Hebrew has three interpretations. One is eis, a time. B, la'ana is to answer. And three, ma'oi means the house. The woman is called one's home. A woman is not an accessory. She's not only a partner, but rather more than that, she is the akeres habayis. She is the mainstay of the home. And therefore, you need to take out time to answer her needs. And that is einasa. According to the Code of Jewish Law, in Orei Chaim, chapter 240, it says over there, what is the obligation of intimacy for a Torah scholar from Friday night to Friday night, implying once a week, and for those who are poyalim, those who are workers, twice a week. However, this is only a basic request, or the minimal. There's a letter from the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he writes that if one has abstinence, this is actually a pitfall, and that we find today that abstinence leads to untold results. And therefore a person should not in any way, in the slightest doubt, feel that he has to have abstinence when it comes to this mitzvah. On the contrary, the person has the obligation to make one's spouse happy. This is pshat, this is the simple interpretation when it comes to these three mitzvos. The chinuch says that why is it that we derive these three obligations of a husband to wife from a servant, a maidservant, to teach us that if this is true, when we are talking about a Jewish maidservant who marries her master and then becomes his wife, how much more so the Benois Chodim, daughters of Israel who are free. One is required to make sure that the husband provides these three basic essentials, and that is food, garments, and happiness. This is all based on pshat, the simple interpretation of the mitzvah. What is the remez, the hint? We are told that during exile, the Jewish people are compared to avadim, we are compared to servants, because we are enslaved by the nations of the world, especially times when we lived in a generation of communism, and of course during the Spanish Inquisition, etc., when Jews were literally oppressed. So the Torah tells us that even when a Jew is living in a time of exile and we are oppressed, God, who is our husband, God, who is our spouse, He is obligated to provide for us and to make sure that every child, every Jew who are considered to be Banim Atem Hashem Lekeichem, we are children of God. And furthermore, we are B'ni B'chai Yisrael, we are God's firstborn, and furthermore, we are also God's spouse. God has to provide for us to make sure that each of us has our food, what we need to eat, and clothing to protect us from the weather and the seasons, and furthermore to have our happiness and our pleasures in life. This is Remez. What is Drush? What is Homiletics? Says the Rambam that a person has the obligation to love his wife as much as himself, but he must respect her even more than himself. What does this mean? Perhaps if, for example, the wife does not like roses, she's allergic to roses, but you love your wife, you want to buy her before Shabbos every week flowers, and you buy her roses. She says, honey, I appreciate the flowers, but I'm allergic to roses. He says, but I love you, I want to buy you roses. Says the Rambam, you have to love your wife as much as yourself, but respect her more than yourself. And therefore, if she does not want roses, do not buy her roses. And the same is true in every aspect of life. You have to respect your wife, even though you think by loving her, you have the right to tell her what to do. Says the Rambam, no, you have to respect her more than you love her. Furthermore, the Rambam tells us that the purpose of why God gave the Torah to the Jewish people was to bring peace into the entire world. The entire objective of why God gave the Torah to the world is to bring peace in the world. And he goes on to say, he quotes from the verse, Dracheha darchi noyam, that the road of Torah is a road that is noyam, which means pleasant and also pleasurable. V'chol nesiviseh sholem, and all its paths are peaceful. In life there are two things, there's the road and the path. The road is wide, the path is narrow. The road alludes to the 613 mitzvos, which preoccupy the majority of one's day. The Torah gives us direction, it gives us light, and it gives us pleasure in this path, in this road, which is very wide of 613 mitzvos. But not only does Torah give us pleasure when it comes to the 613 mitzvos of the Torah, but also when it comes to the path. What is the path? The path is marriage. And here says the Torah that the path of marriage is peace. In other words, there has to be peace in the home. And not only that, the entire purpose of why God gave Torah to the Jewish people was not only that one should follow the 613 commandments of the Torah, but more so, and moreover, the whole purpose of Torah was when it comes to the path, which means the ways of marriage, that the marriage should be b'shalom, it should be with peace. And that is the entire purpose of why God gave Torah to the world. What is Soid? What is the esoteric level of Torah say? These three obligations of She'era, Kususa, Inasa, which is food and garments and pleasure, alludes to three different channels of God's providence and kindness and blessing to the world. She'era, which is food, alludes to the light of God that goes inside, which is referred to the Mamali Kol Almin, or the internal light. And this also alludes to the vessels that God creates to allow us to receive His blessing. And then you have Kesusa, which are the garments that do not go inside the person but around the person. This alludes to the lights of God, the energy of the Makiv, the all-encompassing light. And then you have the level of Inasa, which is pleasure. And this alludes to an Chadosh, Lamaila, a supernal new light, divine effulgence, a divine light that comes down to the world. However, it's not only a greater light, but it's also a light without garments. As the Gemara says in Ksubis 48, side A, that if a husband tells his wife, "It is true, I have the obligation to give you pleasure, that we have to have intimacy. However, I will have intimacy in my garments, and you will wear your garments." Says the Gemara that if a husband will demand to have his garments during intimacy, then he should give his wife a divorce and pay her for the ketubah. What does this mean? So this refers to God's spiritual light and divine effulgence. That this divine light that comes down from God is such a great light that, number one, there is no concealment and there is no obstruction. So not only is it a greater light, but sometimes when the light comes down to the world, there could be something that holds back the light. There's an obstacle that does not allow us to truly receive God's blessing. However, the mitzvah of a nasa, this mitzvah that God is required as a husband to give his bride pleasure, represents a light that is without concealment and obstruction. This is similar to the concept of the difference between a bracha and haftacha, a blessing and a promise. A blessing means potential. The potential is there, but we have to draw it down. A promise means that it comes down regardless whether or not we fulfilled our obligations, or regardless whether or not we fulfilled the requirements, because it is a haftach, it's a promise. And similarly over here, this einasa, this light and this divine blessing comes down in a way without any concealment and without any obstruction. This is the idea based on Said, on the esoteric level, based on Kabbalah. How do we understand this based on Chassidus? The idea of She'ira, Kususa, Veinasa, these three mitzvahs represent the study of Torah, the performance of mitzvahs, and the concept of prayer. In other words, God is the husband and the Jews are the bride, the wife. When it comes to marriage, so we say that it is the path of the man to run after the woman. However, let's say for some reason the husband, which is Almighty God, does not initiate the relationship. Comes along Chassidus and says, how is it possible that the wife, that the Jew down here and the human being down here should initiate this relationship? Says the Torah, you have three ways to do this. Number one, through the study of Torah. Torah is like food. As it says, a way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And similarly with God, the way we get God to bring us down this light and this blessing is through the study of Torah. Torah is like food that we internalize it, we understand it. Kususa is the idea of mitzvos. Garments surround the person. A mitzvah surrounds a person like a talis. It's a mitzvah to put on a talis. It goes around us. We don't take it inside of us. Similarly, we sit in a sukkah. The sukkah surrounds us. Similarly, we light the Shabbos candles. We don't eat the Shabbos candles. The idea of a mitzvah is something which is all-encompassing. And then we have a nasa, the idea of intimacy, which is prayer. And therefore, when a Jew does these three things, he opens up these three channels of blessings, and he initiates the blessing from down here. And furthermore, if God himself, the husband, initiates the intimacy and initiates the relationship, but the spouse does not reciprocate, then it's a one-way show. It's a one-way relationship, and ultimately it ends up with a divorce. But if it's a two-way street, and not only is the husband in love with his wife, but the wife is in love with the husband, in other words, that the spouse, the wife, reciprocates, then this makes the love eternal and everlasting. Says Chassidus that is the way we do this, is through the study of Torah. And through the performance of mitzvahs and through prayer, we have the ability to have a romantic relationship with Almighty God. We hope and pray to see the rebuilding of the Holy Temple, but once again, we will see this marriage between God and the Jewish people in a revealed way. B'mheira b'imenu, amen.